You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week we apologize to the 2010s by saying, sorry to bother you with a Winter's Tale. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. And I am Adam the Judge Thomas.
And I am Thomas Mariani, and shocker, this is my white voice.
Usually it's hey, bibbidi-bobbidi-boobidi. That's your normal voice.
I mean, no, my normal voice is just the Mamma Mia pizzeria, look at me, hey,
Yeah.
oh, get out of my face, sit on it. That's what I usually sound like when I'm not on the mic, because I act like a professional here. But we aren't the only professionals here, Adam. Coming in on his Pegasus, that should be like gliding through the sky, but just kind of awkwardly lifts down onto the ice floe. Returning guest of ours, Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, how are you?
Hey, I'm here for the one episode this season where I shall appear, a fan favorite, and I choose to believe that my alternate black voice would be Donald Glover.
I mean, that's what we all want, technically. Well, we can't get that. It has to be reserved for bad CG Simba.
Yeah.
But Kaycee, you're on here because this is the second part of our retrospective of the 2010s decade. We should mention that this is our first episode that's been released in the new year of 2020, so happy New Year, New Decade, everybody.
Off to a rocky start. What
What are you talking about? Name one horrible thing that happened in the last 3 days.
The last 24 hours. I can name one.
I'll have you know, we've been on a real streak the last almost 30 minutes of not having something horrible happen.
That's true. As of right now, while we're recording, something amazing could happen at any point. But Kaycee, you are here because you really wanted to come on, talk about the decade, and Adam and I talked a bit about our thoughts about the decade in film for the 2010s. But what are your scorching hot takes about the previous 10 years in film?
I think the last 10 years have been the best decade that cinema's had since at least the 70s. Both the mainstream movies that came out have been significantly stronger, and not only has independent work been stronger, the places it could come from and the people who could make it is something that even 10 years ago would be unheard of. Could Tangerine have been made in 2008? Or would Steven Soderbergh be saying, God, I wish that back when I was starting, I just had an iPhone and could put half the movies I make onto Netflix.
No, that's a very good point, especially technologically. We didn't even talk about that last time. Just with the advent of streaming services, there's been a lot more avenues for people to, like, release stuff. And even then, like, the Tangerine's a great example of a movie that's so cinematic, but yet is just shot on the most consumer possible product. Did you say that kind of what we were talking about last week, that we sort of saw the death of, like, the mid-budget movie for sure at the same time?
That is my least favorite thing that's happened this decade, but I feel like that has been happening since the aughts. Like, I can't really name a whole bunch from, like, 2005 to 2010. It was really starting to upscale. I think that a lot of trends, especially with building of franchises and building of cinematic universes, probably expedited that, but I feel like it was happening before that. The only one I can honestly think of, actually I can think of 2. One is Rise of Planet of the Apes, and then this one is like a moment of division between you and I, but I think that's part of the reason I'm pretty fond of Captive State, is that it is a mid-budget little sci-fi movie.
You assume that, like, the division would mean that I remember fucking Captive State that well. By any means. I mean, I'll give it that, yeah, it wasn't a very flashy movie. It did feel like it kind of used its mid-tier budget kind of well. I think that also kind of died with, sorry to bring him up, but I think Harvey Weinstein kind of helped kill that, because he spent a lot of his time making mid-budget, really mediocre Oscar movies.
Wait,
people started representing.
what did he do?
Well, aside from what I said, nothing, clearly. Nothing at all monstrous reprehensible.
Next, you're going to tell me Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey are reprehensible.
Okay, so we have to sit him down. We have to sit him down.
Oh. Not to make a joke out of it, those three people are disgusting pigs.
Oh no, they're all horrible pieces of shit. This was all sarcasm. Yes. Last time, along with doing our good and our bad feature, as we usually do, for those who might be new, usually we just pick a good and a bad feature at the end of a previous episode, and then we discuss that feature here, and then continue the process where, at the end of the episode, Adam and I will each have either two good picks or two bad picks for whatever our next topic will be, and we've assigned numbers between 1 and 10 for both of those, and Kaycee will help us out by helping us pick a good and bad feature for next week. So, much like last week, where we did our best and worst lists, Adam had his worst of the decade list, I had my best of the decade list. We're going to reverse that this time, where I have my worst of the decade list and Adam his best. We'll go into that after we talk about our two features, but speaking of which, our two features for tonight, initially it'll be my bad pick for one of the worst movies of the decade, which was Winter's Tale, and then Adam's good pick of Sorry to Bother You. So that'll be interesting to discuss. So let's go ahead and get the bad out of the way, though. Let's start with Winter's Tale.
Is it possible to love someone so completely they simply can't die?
He is neither angel nor demon. He can still be alive.
I've had some kind of amnesia. I'm looking for something. Can you help me?
No matter how far we tip the scales our way, nothing seems to break their capacity for hope.
If you don't love me now, no one ever will.
Winter's Tale starts February 14th.
So, Winter's Tale came out in 2014, February 14th, 2014, a very romantic film, as we clearly saw.
Aww.
I know, it's so lovely. And it's a classic fantasy star-studded tragic romance of sorts from writer and first-time director Akiva Goldsman, adapting a novel by Mark Halperin, which had been in production at several different points. Originally, Steven Spielberg wanted to do it right after the novel was published in the 80s, and then Martin Scorsese wanted to do it in the early 2000s. But both of them said, you know what, we're going to abandon that because this is pretty unfilmable. And I haven't read the book, but maybe they were right.
Yeah, I'd say what we got is still unfilmable. It's not even a fucking film. It's just a series of just random genres and themes thrown together in a pot.
I almost want to read the book in that I feel like this movie needs a companion novel to explain everything going on. I want Lucasfilm to put out a visual dictionary that explains all the stuff that I couldn't keep track of.
Of course. Yes. Of course, a lot of that might have to do with Akiva Goldsman. He's an Academy Award-winning screenwriter for mainly A Beautiful Mind, but he's also written, amongst other things, A Time to Kill, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, the Lost in Space movie, I, Robot, Cinderella Man, the first two Dan Brown Da Vinci Code movies with Tom Hanks. I haven't done Insurgent, the second Divergent movie, The Fifth Wave, another bad young adult movie, Rings, the bad reboot of The Ring that came out recently, Transformers The Last Night, The Dark Tower.
So pure garbage.
Mostly, yes. Just a bunch of fucking garbage.
Imagine I, Robot being your high watermark.
I know, even I'm not even a big fan of The Beautiful Mind, especially the screenplay is the worst aspect of that movie.
I am fond of it, and I haven't seen it since 2007, and I know the moment I go back to it, it's going to go downhill real quick.
This was based on a book, you said, right?
Yes.
It feels like somebody took the book, took out a bunch of words, and did their own Mad Libs for the script.
Or it looks like the Spark Notes that you would look up if you had this book assigned, but you didn't want to read it. Just oh yeah, all the plot points, I get it.
If you read it on your computer, the old paperclip will come up and just try to explain shit to you.
Do you know why Russell Crowe's headbutting somebody?
Do you know why Colin Farrell's hair looks like this? Shit, for Connolly's crying again. Oh boy.
Oh right, yes, Academy Award winner Jennifer Connelly, who appears in the last 30 minutes of this super long movie.
Yeah,
but Adam and I have both seen this movie previously, and you can kind of tell we love it, clearly.
Yeah,
but Kaycee, you hadn't seen this before, so I want to hear your fresh opinions on Winter's Tale.
I went in blind. I didn't know anything about it. I walked out of I finished the movie. I'm done. I've seen the whole thing. I still know nothing about it. This is fucking incomprehensible. It's amazing that a movie that is 99% people sitting in rooms talking to each other is so bad at expositing what the fuck is going on.
Out of curiosity, Kaycee, what's your best plot synopsis for this movie? I want you to try and give people plot synopsis. Some people out there who have no idea about Winter's Tale.
So, Colin Farrell is immortal for some reason, and has been doing work with Russell Crowe, who I guess is also immortal, or maybe it's just his accent will live forever. And he falls in love with a beautiful redhead, and she has consumption, for which she has been destined to die. But a little girl tells him that if he kisses her on this magic bed in this special spot, she will live forever. And after a wild night of partying, he accidentally fucks her to death. And he tries to bring her back from the dead by kissing her in that spot, and it doesn't work. And then he ends up on the Brooklyn Bridge. And at this point, I tuned out and started thinking about places nearby they could get donuts. That's what I do if I get bored in a movie set in New York. I just start going, okay, donut plants near there. If they go far enough, they can get to dough or donut pub. But after he gets thrown off the bridge, he wakes up and has no memory for some reason. And he just kind of wanders around for, I guess, 100 years until he meets Jennifer Connelly and Jennifer Connelly's cancerous redheaded daughter, who he thinks he could save by taking her to that same spot that was once foreshadowed and kissing her. But Russell Crowe wants to stop him for some reason. And Russell Crowe fails. And then it succeeds, and I guess he dies and becomes a star, and Will Smith is there.
Which is the big part that, when this movie actually came out, anyone talked about, was just like, holy fuck, Will Smith is in this for, 2 scenes where he plays Satan, because Russell Crowe is some kind of, demon creature of some sort, who has a Popeye Irish accent for some reason.
Yahtzee!
Yahtzee!
That's the best part of this movie, far and away. Yahtzee.
That's true, yes. Yahtzee as the astral planes show him his entire thing. I kind of like the scene where he's at the restaurant, tells somebody he wants, a giant eagle to be fried, and then murders them and uses their blood to paint this picture of the fucking redhead you're talking. That's the thing, Russell Crowe has all the weird, interesting stuff in this movie that I remember. The point when he's in the modern day, and he's saying, oh, I can sense Colin Farrell out there, and he fucking jumbles around a bunch of jewelry on his fucking dresser drawer, and suddenly tells him where the fuck Colin Farrell is. All these things actually happen in the movie. But anyway, he takes his orders from Will Smith, who's Satan, in 1914, but he's dressed in Jimi Hendrix shirt for some reason, and he has a bad CG demon mouth at one point.
Yeah, and really forced charisma that doesn't come off neither smooth nor intimidating.
He's just like, nah, I'm saving all of that for After Earth, baby.
I was going to say, welcome to Earth, Russell Crowe. It's so stupid. It's so bad. I don't mind the fact that he's got even the Jimi Hendrix shirt on in the modern suit, because you got to figure if he is supposed to be Lucifer, then maybe he's of all time. He lives in the future as well as the present, as well as the past. Fine, whatever, cool. But knowing that who they thought would be the most charismatic actor to play this version of Satan in a movie against Russell Crowe's just silly, hammy performance. It just, that's the only thing people could think about, because it was kind of a surprise. But nobody looks at it fondly. It's just really a mess amongst an entire other mess.
Well, right, and the reason I kind of chose is I remember when I first saw this just being kind of baffled in a fascinated way by a lot of the weird things that happened in this movie, and I've listed a bunch of them, and maybe those of you who have never heard of this movie are like, oh my god, Thomas, that sounds at least hilariously bad. It's also extremely dull. I forgot how dull this entire movie is, because it just plays out and stretches every single one of these elements out to the point of making any kind of interesting stuff just dry out. There's still some fun in terms of oh hey, here's fucking Russell Crowe's posse in the modern day. Instead of coming up on horses, come up on fucking cars on an ice floe that's frozen. And keep in mind, this is a fleet of fucking really big cars that just come after Colin Farrell. But then the horse just kicks one of its hooves, and that's what makes all of the fucking cars break in to the ice. Just weird nonsensical things like that happen, but it's mostly just a giant bore, which I'm guessing Kaycee you would agree with.
There was a point I was getting concerned because I already put this on late at night, and I was getting worried, will I be able to say I finished this for the podcast? It was taking a lot just for me to stay awake. Like I said, so much of the movie is just people talking about what's going on. And for a movie from not only a acclaimed writer, even if his stuff isn't good, he's still a veteran writer, and he knows how to make stuff decently efficient. That's what you have to do when you do Hollywood blockbusters. These scenes have to be efficient. There is zero efficiency in this movie.
And it's also just so disappointing to see even some of these people Especially Colin Farrell. Like, I had so much hope for Colin Farrell post, like, the sort of weird comeback he was kind of having with, like, In Bruges. I was like, oh my god, I can't wait to see him just really rise back up. And he just got wasted on a lot of stupid shit like this. And conversely, Russell Crowe also is just, like, completely in his fugue state, where, like, that pretty much stopped, like, what? When did Russell Crowe become bad?
Body of Lies or something like that?
Well, Body of Lies was the one he did with DiCaprio, I know, and that was the one I remember where he was like, at the time, like, oh, I'm getting really into character, I'm getting fat for this part.
Yeah.
And he never really got out of that method acting.
Just from that guy forever now.
From then on, just like, oh, I'm playing Robin Hood. Is Robin Hood fat? Now he is.
My favorite post, like, Oscar Russell Crowe is the Russell Crowe fighting around the world from South Park.
Oh, well, of course, that's true. That is his best role. Well, I will say, like, there are a few points where he kind of sprouts like a nice guy's, obviously. Where it's just like, oh my god, you are really talented, and then he'll do like a mummy right afterward. And it's like, oh, what are you doing?
Or Les Mis. Like, no, don't sing. Don't sing.
I know you have a rock band, honey, but don't sing.
Yeah, please don't. Well, but then you see him in, like, and I know a lot of people hate the movie, and Thomas, I believe you're one of them, but I thought him as Jor-El in Man of Steel I thought he was really good.
No, I had no issue with him in that movie. No, it's a lot of the other stuff around him.
Yeah, that makes sense. Russell Crowe can still turn in a really good character-driven sort of performance if he tries. But then he can also be Russell Crowe in A Winter's Tale, where he's trying way too hard. And it's just ridiculous.
But no, I guess we should go back to A Winter's Tale, even though, yeah, it's kind of hard to, just because we mentioned all this, like I said, really weird stuff that happens in this movie, but none of it really sticks. Like, honestly, despite how much we're talking about Russell Crowe, he's at least the most consistently weird thing about the movie. Where, like, I even kind of mentioned, like, his headbutting thing against Colin Farrell is, like, my favorite part of the whole movie. Because it's like, how do I defeat this, like, a beautiful, handsome man? I'll headbutt his face to death? And then throw him off the fucking bridge, as opposed to just like all the boring non-chemistry with like Colin Farrell and Jessica Brown Flannery, I believe is her name, the female lead.
The one I texted you and said Keira Knightley.
Oh, and who did you think Mr. William Hurt was initially?
I thought he was Bill Nighy.
I was just like, Kaycee, did you watch a different movie?
Yeah, you mentioned me like Bill Nighy isn't in this movie. I was like, I'm pretty certain Bill Nighy's in this movie.
Nobody has any chemistry with each other in this movie.
No.
Like, even Colin Farrell, the main love interest, I don't buy a second of it. I don't think anybody in this understands what movie they're in at any given point. Like, Colin Farrell's, got this beautiful hair, and he's getting a headbutt off a bridge, and all of a sudden he's on a goddamn Pegasus in modern-day New York. Like, what the fuck is happening here? It's like it's 5 different genres mashed together at once by clearly a first-time director, and just really not a good screenwriter. Yet, he won an Oscar. So, oh god, direct this unfilmable thing. You take a crack at it.
Well, he apparently treated this as like a big passion project for him. Like, he really took this under his wing, just loved the book, and wanted to adapt it to the screen. And it almost feels like a movie made by somebody who maybe, like, gets the idea of the book, but can't translate why it works. You might be a fan of it, but I don't fucking get what's so special about this book that just doesn't make any fucking sense. It feels like it's a movie that's almost, like, expounded upon by, like, a 5-year-old who's trying to tell you, like, and then this happened, and then the lady ended up with Colin Farrell, and they had sex, and then she died of consumption, and then this happened.
And he's an angel, I think. I think he's an angel and becomes a star.
This one feels like it wants to say, like, oh, let's get to the cool parts, and just kind of half-ass the connecting material. That's what it kind of feels like. And all the cool parts are just weird shit that happens, doesn't make any goddamn sense at all. When you hear the idea, like, oh man, Colin Farrell has a Pegasus, you would think that would sound so interesting. And then you watch the movie, and it's mostly this horse that he calls Horse, and has long scenes of back and forth dialogue with. Like, Horse, I don't know, should I break into this house? Okay, Horse, I'll do it.
Yeah, I guess I agree. You see the trailer and Colin Farrell's on the Pegasus, and I was like, finally, my actual dreams that I have nightly have come true. But then it's like, it just falls apart, man. I still have those dreams, though.
One day it'll be true.
But it's weird now. Now it's like bullseye Colin Farrell.
It pissed me the fuck off that they never named the horse. Because, like, it's just gonna be awkward if you just keep calling him Horse. Name him fucking Horace if you have to.
Kaycee, what was your favorite bizarre turn that happened in this movie? Of, like, all the weird things that happen.
At least the one I'm selling at people on is when he accidentally fucked his girlfriend to death.
Which, by the way, she dies immediately. Like, they just, like, sit down comfortably, like, oh, that was so great. She just dies immediately. Followed by him, once again, like you're saying, kind of like taking her to this magic bed to try and bring her back to life and doesn't. Which makes it so much creepier when he ends up doing that later to the little, like, cancer girl. It's God, fucking creepy.
I was so afraid he was going to kiss her on the lips. I was thinking, this movie probably won't, but I can't guarantee it won't.
That's the thing. It's like you're sitting down with this movie and you're like, nothing. It's one of those things where, like, usually in a movie, you would love the idea of, like, oh, I have no idea what to expect. Any turn that this could make would be, like, really fascinating. I'm on the edge of my seat. But this is one where it's like you're not on the edge of your seat. You're unpredictable in a scary way. Every single story point kind of turns to that. But luckily, it's just mostly stupid shit. Like, say, Russell Crowe getting stabbed through the chin and then becoming a snowman Russell Crowe.
Mr. Farrell, you could have saved them. I gave you all the clues.
Another movie that might show up later when we get to our lists. Put a pin in that. It's very clear we're kind of not really have much to say about Winter's Tale anymore. So, anyway, Kaycee, your final thoughts on Winter's Tale.
I can't believe I'm about to say this sentence. I wish this was more like Collateral Beauty. Because that movie, as much of a train wreck as it is, always interests me. It always finds new ways to excite me with how it's going off the rails with its magical realism bullshit. This didn't excite me. This was a slog. This was a chore. It felt like having to watch a really, really bad educational video that just would not end. Example, during the sex scene, I just wanted the movie to move on. I was banking on the movie deciding that he prematurely ejaculates just so you could get to the next scene. There's some stuff I like. I think that Russell Crowe is giving it his all. I think that some of the cinematography is good. I think that some of the production design is good. But overall, it's just really fucking boring to look at. It's really fucking boring in every sense except to describe. Because I tried to tell 3 people about the movie in the last 24 hours. All 3 of them, when I describe it, it sounds like a much more interesting movie than you're getting into. And then I have to go like, oh, it's also incredibly boring. One tiny gripe that I have that pissed me off completely, Eva Marie Saint, which, by the way, Eva Marie Saint's in this movie,
yep,
is able to look up at the sky in Manhattan and see stars. You can't do that. It's a giant ray of light shooting up at the sky. On a good night, you can see Venus. You cannot see stars on that island.
No. Also, the fact that she sees this guy who she recognized as a child, and he's exactly the same from, like, 1916, and she doesn't have, like, immediately a heart attack and dies. Like, and even, like, very strong-willed people would, like, at least, like, completely have their minds blown, but she's just like, oh, it's you, let's have a hug. It's like, this frail old woman would just immediately collapse and die at seeing this.
Oh, and if stars are just dead lovers reuniting or whatever bullshit I was trying to say, what's the space program like in this universe?
The stars are just couples fucking. That's what really space is.
I was going to say, yeah, that's just a bunch of voyeurs.
Houston, we have no problem with this situation.
Right. Houston, we have lift off.
While you have the floor, your final thoughts, Adam.
I didn't even care if Colin Farrell prematurely ejaculated. I just wanted this over. The first time I saw it, I hated it. And this time, full disclosure, I couldn't even find a good copy of it. So I watched like supercuts and listened to other podcasts and read other reviews just to kind of get a memory refresher. And even with all of that, with hours of like trying to study, I still don't know what the fuck this thing is trying to do, what this movie is trying to say. It's a garbage fire that, like Kaycee said, if you describe it to somebody or when you see the trailer or something, it looks like it's got promise or it could be pretty good. And I mean, it just doesn't deliver on anything. And the horrible CG mouth and the horrible CGI Russell Crowe face when he freaks out, it's really stupid, man. It's trying to be so many different things and also have a message, but also be whimsical, but also be a comedy, but also be romantic, also be a fantasy, and it just doesn't land on anything. It's just a garbage fire of a movie.
Well, yes, I mean, I completely agree with all that. And I think also the big thing is, like, what I remembered of this movie was almost being, like, so bad it's kind of good and fascinating. It's not that either. That's the big thing, is, like, as Kaycee mentioned, it's so boring. It's so much better to, like, have it described to you, really, than watching this entire movie. Just really go for boring stretch on boring stretch, and occasionally something just, like, weird will happen, you'll be confused. Like, from the start, there's our main love interest, she's just like, oh, my consumption gives me a sixth sense of some sort that tells me I might fall in love with somebody. Then there's a boring stretch, and then they have the meet cute where Colin Farrell and her meet up as he's trying to rob her house, and then boring stretch. That's the thing, like, there are occasional peaks of just like, what the fuck's happening? But it's mostly just a very boring slog. But I think that still makes it appropriate for a worst of the decade list in general. Would you guys maybe agree with that, at least? That it fits the monicum of worst of the decade?
Oh,
Yep.
definitely.
Yes, which is why it'll be on my list later. But we'll get to those lists in a second. We have a whole other feature to talk about, but first, let's have a little ad for an ESO show that you can listen to right after our show.
This is a Nerd Atlanta flashback featuring comic book artist Lawson Chambers.
Whenever people reboot things, there's this instinct to make it darker and grittier.
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't need to see a darker, grittier Sonic the Hedgehog. That is wild to me. That, like, in our modern age, that our trailer for a movie could come out and fans could go, no, we hate the way that little blue man looks. Change it.
New podcast episodes will be available soon.
Alright, let's get into our second feature from 2018, Sorry to Bother You.
I just really need a job.
Stick to the script.
Hey, hello. Sorry to bother.
Let me give you a tip. Use your white voice.
As always, we'll be getting that out to you right away.
I got promoted. I'm a power caller.
Be clear. It is morally emaciated.
Cash. You are awesome.
Some for the homies and some for me.
Hell yeah. That's right.
So, full disclosure, last week we talked about a movie from 2019 and another movie that was maybe a bit less seen by a lot of people. We didn't put up a spoiler warning. We definitely would want to put up a spoiler warning for Sorry to Bother You. If you've never, like, seen this movie or even heard of it, full disclosure, we're going to talk about the movie in detail. But this is a movie that benefits from not knowing anything, and especially not knowing what happens in, like, the last fourth of it, which is maybe the most daring and insane cinema I've ever seen. Would we all maybe agree with that?
Yeah, it's off the fucking rails, dude. The last quarter of this movie, I almost don't even want to talk about it. I mean, we have to talk about it. But I'm just worried that people who haven't seen it might be like, where can it be? And listen to it, and then you're going to just miss out on the surprise. Because this is one, like, you can't know that's coming. It makes the movie. It makes the movie, honestly.
Yes. Just pause this episode and watch it. It's on Hulu right now. Sorry to bother you. You can definitely just take a look at that. And then come back and listen to us talk about this movie more in depth, which we're going to do right now. So, Sorry to Bother You, as I mentioned, came out in 2018. It was directed and written by Boots Riley, who some of you might know as the lead sort of person of The Coop, which is a great rap ensemble from mainly sort of like the mid-90s. They still continue to work to this day. And they even made an album called Sorry to Bother You, which was actually based on the screenplay that Boots Riley had in his pocket for like about 8 or so years before this movie finally got made. And the way I would probably describe this best is like, imagine a late 90s, early 2000s music video from MTV that really warped your mind, but it's feature length. That's really what I love about this movie, is it feels like a feature length crazy ass music video that never stops that energy, despite being about an hour 50 minutes long.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. I think that's completely fair.
And you hadn't seen this before, Adam, even though despite it being your pick.
Oh. Yeah, no, I haven't seen it before, but I know you talked about how good it was at different lengths without ever spoiling it. Friend of the show, Shaquille Lambert, talked about it and praised it quite a bit. So I was like, all right, I got to give it a try. And wow, am I glad I did. It is, it's full of great performances, really good visual stuff, a lot of good commentary. It's funnier than hell. And fucking ending, man. Armie Hammer in this, by the way, because I usually, Armie Hammer's kind of vanilla. Like, I'm good on Armie Hammer. He's so good in this. Fucking, I love him in this. And Lakeith Stanfield's always good.
Yeah, I think this is the Armie Hammer thing. It's so weird that like he would follow up something like Call Me by Your Name, a very beautiful, tender, subtle movie that's just like, oh my god, he's just like such a warm, inviting dreamboat of a man, and then just basically play a coked out, crazy rich person in this movie. It's such a contrast. It shows just how versatile he really is as an actor, for sure. But Kaycee, you were a big fan of this, I know, when it came out, and does that still stand to this day?
It's died down a little for me, just in that it's the more I've watched it, the more this is a first-time movie comes to mind, which that's another thing that I liked about this pairing of movies, that they're both first-time directors doing movies that are almost a kitchen sink of all the ideas they had about something they're passionate about. And obviously this one is way fucking more successful. I know it might be cliche to say there's only one of this, but there was only one movie ever made like Sorry to Bother You, and it is Sorry to Bother You. It's fascinating, it's political commentary, it's funny, it's amazing what they did with so little. Like, the movie had so few computer effects that on the computer screens on the background in the office are just printed out and taped with a light behind them.
Yeah, but what's so fascinating is, like, you really get a sense that that's very much a stylistic choice. It definitely feels like there's sort of, like, a weird blend of, like, influences like a Spike Jonze or Michel Gondry, but even also, like, a Spike Lee or even a John Singleton, just, like, all meshed up into this bizarre, weird movie that, as you mentioned, like, despite having all those influences, is unlike any specific thing you can ever really point to in terms of film. And I still just remember watching this movie, and people in my audience, which was a pretty solidly packed crowd, were pretty much into it until what happens in the fourth part of this movie happens, and then most of them left, which is another great thing. Like, this is definitely one that would, like, not appease mostly, like, a normal crowd. And I kind of love the movie for that. It feels so distinctly of its own. I think it's a big credit to Anna Perina, who is a weird sort of like sister to A24 in this decade, where A24 kept just making movies that, despite how small and not very mainstream they were, they end up just keep making money despite that. Anna Perina is like sort of like the tragic sister to that in terms of making great, weird movies, but most of them end up flopping, I think mainly because Anna Perina has no idea how to make itself a distinctive brand. And they also made Her, which did fine, and even this did pretty well, where it's like a $3.2 million budget, but made $18 million. But still at the same time, they have had more high-profile flops, and this is the company that Megan Ellison basically took all her riches and turned it into a production company, and they just released something as recently as Booksmart that not enough people saw in the theater. But why do you think maybe this one at least got a bit more attention, Kaycee? Why do you think this one sort of stuck out amongst their various different films?
If I had to guess, probably a little bit more towards trends of the fact that Lakeith Stanfield was kind of having a moment coming off of a really good performance in Get Out, and black cinema in general had really been taking off. It kind of helped that it had like the same way you're calling Annapurna's sister studio to A24, this kind of had a sister sibling to Blind Spotting, two black movies out of Oakland in the span of like a month.
Which were shot literally in Oakland at the same time, actually, interestingly enough.
Yeah, and by pure coincidence, they're like two of my three favorite movies of 2018. Probably it got a little bit lucky that it struck a nerve in the right moment with the right people behind it. That's the other thing about this, is that Boots Riley was able to call in like all his celebrity favors. Like, hey, Patton Oswalt, can you come in for an afternoon and do voice recording for me? Or, hey, Terry Crews, I need you to hold this Jesus insulin pump.
Yes.
Every time I watch this movie, there's a new joke that I forget about until I watch again. For me, this time, it was the Jesus insulin pump.
Oh, and there's plenty of like other great people that are all abound. Like even David Cross is the other white voice, which that was really what sold me when the original trailers came out. It's just these black people who have to go on and like do customer service, or in this case telemarketing, have to put on a distinctively white voice to get people comfortable. That's such an amazing idea. And I guess it's also full disclosure that none of us here are black. I know you might think, like, especially Kaycee looks like Terry Crews in real life, but no, he does not. Shocker.
It's just weird genetics. I don't get it, man.
No, yeah, but I mean, even then, it does still speak to at least, like, even on a class level, a lot more of just, like, that's what the main satire really is. It's just more of, like, a downtrodden, sort of, like, lower-level people completely getting screwed over. One might rise up, but it's like, oh, you have to completely sell out any of your, like, dignity or morals whatsoever to do so, which I think is just, like, a great relatable story in general, but also, of course, there's so many different layers of commentary and everything like that. But where did this movie really hook you, Adam, for your first time? Where did it really, like, sink its teeth into you?
Man, that's a good question. Because I was kind of going through the paces in the very, first 20 minutes, half hour. I really liked seeing Stephen Yeun from Walking Dead pop up because I do like him a lot as an actor. I think he's kind of underutilized in most things, or just not used enough. But probably Danny Glover with the whole white voice thing, that got me. But I loved his fucking boss, who looks like the fucking ex-crackhead with the face tattoos and everything.
Yes.
I fucking love that guy. That guy kills me. He's like that fucking coworker or boss we've all had who's like just way too excited about his job. Like either A, it's phony and forced because it's all he has in the world, or B, he's just instantly a company man. And I think that guy, he came across like maybe a little bit of both. But I fucking loved that guy. He was killing me. He was making me laugh so hard.
Yeah, Michael X. Summers is the actor's name.
Yeah, so funny.
But yeah, I think what really hooked me was the moment Lakeith had his first phone call, and they visualized that by having his desk pop up in whatever different environment.
That was really fucking cool. I was not expecting that.
No, yeah, that's such a great, it's like an example of like sort of a Michelle Gondry, Spike Jonze style visual, that really puts you in the spot of, especially, as someone who has worked a lot in customer service, especially like over the phone. I've had sort of awkward conversations like this, or just phone calls that completely went blank. But at the same time, what I also love is that, like, there's this main sort of drive going out with Lakeith Stanfield, his sort of story, but there's so much great background, like, just subplots going on that you can, like, really pick up, like Kaycee was kind of talking about, as you rewatch the movie. Particularly my favorite one being, as he rises up, there's a point when he gets hit by a Coke can, by somebody, and you see in the background that person becomes like a weird internet celebrity, and then has a commercial, and then people keep wearing these wigs that resemble Lakeith Stanfield's hair, and there's a shot of a bunch of white kids wearing that fro as Halloween costumes. It's just like that in of itself could be like an entire film. But it's just like a great running joke in the background of this movie. That's what works so well, is it's just so dense that it really honors rewatches, just to see like all the weird shit that keeps happening.
Like we mentioned, this was written in 2012, and I have a feeling that because he had an extra like 6 years to go back and rewrite it, he could adjust things here or there. I believe at one point he said that there was a line in the script that he wrote originally that said, "We have to make America great again," and he decided that maybe that one's a little too on the nose. He has to cut it. This actually goes into one of my two gripes with this movie, where the one bit of satire I think does not work is when you write this in 2012, what's on TV a lot of really, really shitty reality TV. That's right where we bottomed out. And the go-to show, I Got the Shit Kicked Out of Me, that feels like a artifact of something written for in 2012, satirizing what was on TV then, but has fallen out of favor now.
Well, if anything, it just feels more like it's too polished, and it's like more of a satire of game shows, weirdly, from like the 70s, as opposed to, like now that would just be like an internet show without any production value whatsoever, of just like people randomly kicking each other in the balls.
Also, in the world and time this movie exists, I mean, anything, it's fair play for anything. It doesn't, I mean, there could have been a That's My Beaver, Leave It to Beaver type show on the television, and in this world, to me, it would have made sense. But I do get what you're saying. But once you get to the last quarter of this movie, for me at least, it's hard to look back on anything in the first bit of the movie and sort of judging on its realism, because this movie just spins so far off the fucking grid. That's like, well, everything I saw before, you're like, yeah, all right, I get it.
I would say my only issue with, and this is more upon watching a second time, especially hearing some criticism that I do kind of agree with about the movie, I really like Tessa Thompson. I think she's very good in this part. I just don't know what Boots Riley is really getting at with her character, who's just sort of like this performance artist who says a bunch of different, like, very vague platitudes about just sort of, like, satirizing, like, especially sort of, like, feminist black art in particular, and it just doesn't feel like he quite has a direction to go with, and I'm not sure, like, are you making fun of this? She adopts a white voice of Lily James, but it's like, so is she, like, faking all of this? Or is she too sincere? I'm not sure what they're going for with that character.
I definitely agree. Because I thought the same thing. I'm like, when he goes into the art gallery and she's got the Lily James voice. I'm like, oh, she's full of shit. But then it's like, she instantly's like, I can't roll with you anymore. And you're like, wait, so she's not full of shit? She's got Bob Dylan lyric earrings? Like, what the fuck is going on? I agree. I don't think her character was handled as well as it could have been. I think the core of a cool character was there, and I do think she really gave it her all and turned in a really, really good performance. But I do agree that her character motivation maybe was a little bit kind of all over the place.
Theoretic, and I agree that's definitely of the characters probably handled the weakest. But I do really dig the idea of like showing an artist who is actually able to have some success, but she has to have some success as long as she is appeasing the people with money who are able to pay her. And so even some of her avant-garde stuff is sort of appeasement. She's a lot more of a renegade and a rebel outside of that with her street art.
But wouldn't that then make her a hypocrite of a character?
Right, which would be interesting if, like, they handled that at some point. If, like, he were to almost throw that back at her, as someone's like, well, you do, like, this thing and say another. I agree. I think, like, there's a kernel of, like, some kind of interesting, like, contrast where, like, that's why they kind of have a connection. There is maybe they're more alike than they might think they aren't. But I don't think they just, like, give her enough of, like, a definitive character to really say all that. And it feels like we're more focused on Lakeith Stanfield for obvious reasons, for, like, plot reasons and other things. I would almost wish they also kind of did a bit more, like, they almost hint at a relationship between her and Steve Yeun after her and Lakeith briefly break up, and I would almost wish they kind of maybe even went more in that direction as well, because to be fair, I mean, there's that point where Steve Yeun's twirling that sign, I'm like, damn girl, get it. Like, look at him.
I totally got the vibe that they did hook up. She told him that she hooked up with somebody. So, and I mean, it was right after they kissed, so I'm assuming it was him. But I agree, there could have been a lot more character dynamic between the three of them at that point. Another arc there, but then at the same time, I don't know that sort of a love triangle or a rivalry or something like that.
The movie couldn't quite sustain that. Like, the movie has so much.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been necessary. I think what we got was. So, I think that was enough, but, you know, whatever. I'm not Thomas fucking Mariani, so
that's true. Yes.
I got a blog. It's on www.angelfire.com.
4 years running. Anyway, but
happy anniversary.
But anyway, there's so much other, like, great stuff to talk about. You mentioned Danny Glover, I totally agree. The bit in particular, like, what saves even, like, that whole I got the shit kicked out of me bit, for me, is him saying, like, I love it so much, I got the motherfucking t-shirt, and he just rips off his fucking shirt. I'm loving the Danny Glover renaissance, and I feel like this kind of started it. That's been happening the last couple of years, because now he's been in, like, a bunch more things. He was just in, like, Jumanji 2, obviously, or Last Black Man in San Francisco he was really great in, I think he's, like, having a bit more of a moment, weirdly late in his career, and I'm glad to see that. I do love also his best friend, Jermaine Fowler. The scene where, like, him and Lakeith Stanfield have the compliment off is just one of the funniest fucking scenes of the decade to me. It's just like, oh, hey, you smell great. What's that? Is that cologne? It smells wonderful. Oh, no, it's just deodorant. Wow, it must be great. You're so awesome. Let's have drinks. How about a bunch of drinks? Let's do it. Like, they just keep going back and forth. I die laughing every time I see that bit. That's so fucking hysterical to me. What's one of the funnier scenes for you in the movie, Kaycee?
I'm never going to forget watching it in the theater. It was not exactly a packed house, and there was a little old lady a couple rows ahead of me who walked out the moment they started talking about the idea of a white voice. And I fucking lost it the first time I heard David Cross. I did not watch the trailer going into this movie. I knew nothing about it. And oh my god, that moment fucking killed me. Yeah,
particularly the bit where, like, Lakeith Stanfield's, like, celebrating and he's got the wine glass. He's just like, some for my homies and some for me, in the David Cross voice, is amazing. It's like it's such a fucking hysterical line. But what's another really funny moment for you, Adam?
I like that Mr. Beep, whatever the hell his name is. I love his fucking eye patch and sideburns, but and his little derby. But I love that he's Patton Oswalt's voice. So whatever it's him and Lakeith Stanfield together, you just got these two giant nerds just bouncing back and forth. with the whitest fucking voices ever, like even whiter than our voices, which is saying a lot. But I loved anything Armie Hammer did on screen. I was all for. He fucking killed me in this movie.
My favorite Armie Hammer line in this movie is after the big reveal and he's showing the video, how he just goes, but what I'm describing here, it's not rational. Like, anytime I hear that line, I fucking lose it. Because he does not want people to think he's nuts. He doesn't care if people think he's a douche. He's just going, no, this makes sense economically. We should do this.
Yeah, another great Armie Hammer sort of bit is him saying, like, oh, Lakeith, you can rap, right? Go up there and rap. And the rap that he does, which I will not go near repeating whatsoever, but that entire sequence, no, not at all, is one of, like, the most satirically on-point great things I've ever seen, about basically just white people, like, taking on and embracing black culture in the most bottom-of-the-barrel way possible. I just love the way that scene plays out, and how satirically genius it honestly is, despite how obviously very blunt it is.
No, this time watching it, I was wondering, is that how Boots Riley sees the Coop's hip-hop career?
I bet that's how he sees modern-day hip-hop as a whole, to be honest with you. A lot of old-school guys and things like that, that's how they kind of see it. Not necessarily appropriation, but maybe a little bit of cultural appropriation. Definitely, gentrification of the hip-hop genre. Don't get me wrong, I'm about as white as I can be, but I grew up loving hip-hop and still do. But there's no excuse why certain guys who are big today are big, other than to be like, look, I'm listening to the new hip-hop guy. It's kind of ridiculous. And that scene, Thomas, you're 100% right. I've been in rooms or get-togethers or weddings or parties where that exact same thing happens. And it's disgusting and just disturbing, and it makes me want to leave.
Yes. But speaking of something that made a lot of people want to leave in many of the theaters that were showing this movie, we gotta get to it. The twist that happens in this movie, where someone goes through not the jade door, but the olive door. There's a very clear difference, which is another great small bit in this movie I love. And who does Lakeith Stanfield find in a bathroom but a horseman? This fucking mutant horseman. And it's a whole plot to, like, basically make labor so much more cost-effective and cheap by basically genetically modifying people to be literal labor horses.
I am very glad that you guys inadvertently chose a double feature of magical realism movies with horses who fuck.
That's true. we did do that. Yeah, I mean, I still remember watching this. Throughout all this, like, I'm still consistently entertained, and I'm just like, oh man, this movie just goes so wild, I can't believe this is already, like, one of my favorites of that year, and maybe potentially of the decade as things would go along. And then that happens, and I'm just like, just fucking innovating all the time. I can't believe this is fucking happening. It's shot like a horror scene, and it's genuinely terrifying. And I found out that horse is voiced by Forrest Whitaker, who's a producer on this movie.
I learned that last night.
Yeah, which I do love when he pops up later. He's just like, oh, thank you for helping us. Man, I'm from Oakland, too. We talk normal, just because I'm a fucking horseman, which is so great. But Adam, how, like, you did not know any of this, right? Going in. I was very clear not to spoil you on this whatsoever.
Yeah. I just knew that the movie went off the rails. That's about all I knew. How? I had no idea. Honestly, from the previews or even the poster with bandaged Lakeith Stanfield, I expected maybe like an apocalyptic scenario or something like that. I had no idea. Or maybe just like his day just keeps getting worse, which it sort of does. But no, I never expected equestrian people. Not once did I expect there to be giant horsemen with huge flopping dongers, nonetheless. And the fact that he freed them and then they come to his aid at the end and just beat up all the mercenaries and shit because they're super strong too. I mean, I lost my shit, man. I couldn't fucking believe it. And and then like you said, Armie Hammer sitting there just trying to explain it to him, like, no, you're not getting it. Look, wait a minute, man. Wait a minute. No, if you would have watched the video, you would have understood. It's fucking wild. I never, ever would have thought this movie would go that turn. And then the very last shot of the movie, you're like, oh, of course. Let's just make it even crazier. Like, why not? Sure, he got a delayed sort of powder. It's fucking wild, man. I can't celebrate the last quarter of this movie enough.
Well, especially, like, my favorite thing about it is, like, this ends up getting videotaped, and he goes on a bunch of talk shows and reveals it to everybody. And the genius of this movie is that happens, and then their stock goes up, and Armie Hammer's even richer, and it's just like that. That's the immediate turn that happens here. It's just like, oh, wait, no, even if this doesn't happen, you're gonna end up getting fucked over anyway. Exposing this doesn't matter. Especially, that's what makes this feel like it goes from necessarily being like, oh, a dated 2012 sort of storyline to much more modern, where it's like, look at all this corruption. Isn't it great?
That goes to my second big gripe, and don't get me wrong, I adore that. When that scene happened, I believe I nearly had trouble breathing because of how hard I was laughing the first time. Though the movie becomes so huge that after that, going back to trying to settle a union dispute.
Well, no, I think what works about that to me is more just a case of, like, it shows off the fact that, like, there's that great scene where, like, after all that happens, Lakeith Stanfield talks with Steve Yeun and Jeremy Fowler about, like, man, I just thought this would actually, like, do something here. It's like, well, you can't really make a huge change that would get, like, a lot of these corrupt people out of power. It seems almost impossible for the average man, but the important thing is kind of, like, fight for what you can maybe control by any extent. And I think that's the thing, is, like, the movie ends up where it's just, like, it's a small victory of, like, well, we got, like, our union to, like, end up actually doing something. So we have a small victory, but the important thing is to even keep fighting. I think Lakeith Stanfield says something like, we gotta start fighting somewhere, to some degree. It's like, you gotta work within the weird capitalist fucked up system. Like, you can't, like, to quote Rocco's Modern Life, you can't fight City Hall, necessarily. But you can at least make a small change that matters for, like, people directly in your community. Which I think is, like, a much more interesting and, like, honestly, like, reliable message to have than, like, oh, you can change the world. Not quite, but you can at least make a small change that matters.
I really like that, for as absurdist and sometimes cartoonish as this movie is, there's one thing it plays completely straight, and it's the formation of the union. It's just Lakeith Stanfield going to a busted vending machine, and Steve Yeun just talks to him. At first, it's a whisper. He thinks, maybe this guy is legit. Maybe I could get him on board. I don't know for certain. I need to talk in code. I need to make sure he's for real. And come on, and then it's all right. I think you're on board. Come on, let's get drinks. I'm buying. He's slowly trying to indoctrinate people into this. It shows a very realistic way of, here's how you can form a union.
No, it doesn't bother me that it ends sort of on a whimper either. I mean, because, well, obviously it does at the very last second of the movie. It's fucking goes right back to batshit crazy. But I think you'd almost have to tone it down for the last 10 minutes. Real quick, to make that last scene, even if I'm basing it just on the last frame of the movie, to make it have any sort of impact, you'd have to quiet the movie down first. And I do agree with what you said, Thomas, too. It just shows that change isn't necessarily going to happen right off the bat in a big way. Sometimes it takes little victories first. And I really didn't have a problem with it. Again, though, this is my first time watching it, so maybe on repeated viewings I'd find it sort of a little lingering, but as of right now, no, I can kind of understand why it's there. And
I want to ask, did you also watch past when, like, the title card comes up at the end for the little bit of a scene after that?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh. No, I didn't even know there was, like, a little stinger. What is it? You gotta tell me now.
It's not really it's not technically a stinger, because it just comes with, like, Sorry to Bother You, written by Boots Riley, and then the scene happens where it's at Armie Hammer's place, and he's, like, kind of relaxed and just like, oh, well, man, another crazy bender. I wonder what's going to happen next. And then he gets a ring at his doorbell, and it's Lakeith as a horseman with a bunch of other horsemen, just like, hey, sorry to bother you, man, but we're going to come and beat the fuck out of you. And then they storm into his house.
Really?
And that's the ending bit of the movie.
Oh, I gotta see that now.
But yeah, that's the thing. This movie just pops up with all sorts of different surprises. So we could go into more, but we should, I guess, wrap it up here. So, Kaycee, our guest, your final thoughts on Sorry to Bother You.
Despite the things I brought up, this is one of my favorite movies of the decade. It swings for the fences. It hits a lot of home runs. It puts everything it wants in there. Everything about it, the production design should have won an Oscar, and I think we need to give it the 2018 Oscar, and maybe as an interest payment, the 2019 Oscar as well. I love the cast. I love the music. Not only is this one of my favorite movies of the decade, the album is one of my favorite albums of the decade. I gush about this movie. This is one of my favorite movies to show people. A lot of people have ended up not liking it, but it has also gone under a lot of their skins in a way that there's only one movie like this. You do not forget Sorry to Bother You.
All right, then, Adam, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really glad I chose this. I'm really glad I watched it for the show and just for myself. I still don't know that this would be on my personal top 10 of the decade. Now it would be on my top 10 easily of 2018. It's a really, really good movie. It's batshit crazy at the end, and it has sort of a undercurrent of, just there's going to be chaos at any second brewing throughout the whole movie. And you're just sort of taken you're following just sort of a bystander through it. And at one point, someone who causes it. It's really fucking funny. It's smart as a whip. It's very, very competently directed and acted. You're right. The soundtrack for this is fucking badass. And this is one that I'm excited to show people.
Yeah, and I loved it as well. I would agree with that. And it didn't quite make my list, obviously, last episode of the decade, mostly because there's just so many movies that I agonize over putting in there. But it definitely is like in a longer sort of like top 20 or so. It would definitely show up there. I think it's a phenomenal example of just like unbridled creative, just like juices flowing in a way that has some like hairy moments, like especially like I said with the Tessa Thompson character, but I think it has like so many great ideas and so much gumption, especially just so much creative chutzpah as a word. Notice I'm using very white terms to talk about this movie. It's the bee's knees, it's the cat's meow. It's
a real choo choo Charlie.
It's really doing the Charleston right there on the dance floor. But no, I think it's a tremendous movie. It's a weird thing where like I would almost want Boots Riley either to have an extremely long directorial career after this, or almost have no other movie after this, because it feels like this is such a weird, interesting, and like perfect object of a movie that it's almost as if he really went into this like, hey, I might never get to make another movie again, so I'm gonna just put everything out there. I almost wonder if like maybe him doing another movie, he might not be as like creatively spry and like just all over the place. And I think it's one of those rare cases where it's like a first movie has just like all this magic up front that you might not be able to recreate. That it's definitely just something to be preserved. It's something to definitely like be studied for like ages to come after this. And everybody in the movie's great, and all this other stuff. The soundtrack, like you mentioned, is phenomenal. It's a great, unique movie that I think really also just works. Maybe not as like one of the best of the decade, but definitely one of the movies that sort of defines the decade for a lot of reasons. But that's the end of our discussion of our two movies, and now we have our lists to go through. But yeah, just like last week, for those of you who might have not been listening last week, we're going to go through most of our list in a sort of general order. I'm going to stick with my chronological thing that I did before, but all the other guys here are going to order of like 9 movies in various different order, but at the very end we'll talk about either our absolute best or, in my case, worst movie of the entire decade. So I'll start with my list first, just to get all that pesky negativity out of the way here. So I'll start with 2010, a movie that Adam talked about last time, The Last Airbender, which was M. Night Shyamalan's, I think, lowest point after a lot of really bad movies. That was sort of like the lowest point he probably got to in his career. It's one of the biggest big budget, massive snafus of a bad adaptation. But what's interesting is, despite being like age appropriate for the animated series from Nickelodeon when it was coming out, I never watched The Last Airbender show until after I saw this movie, because this movie at least had the power to be so terrible that I was like, I've heard so many people like this series, and I have to watch it just to like at least see what they fucked up. And I realized, yeah, they really fucked it up from like every possible level whatsoever. So if nothing else, it's the one movie on this list that got me to watch something much more entertaining and much more enriching and much better with the source material. Next, from 2012, we have a movie we've actually covered on the show here before, so I'm not going to talk about a huge amount. But it is Dario Argento's Dracula, which I ended up picking for our Rutger Hauer episode that we did several months ago. And I said then, it's one of the worst things I've ever seen. And I continue to say that. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen. Listen to that episode to talk about how boring and awful and lame that movie is. Yes. But 2012 had another one that I thought was just like so bad, but in a way that's at least like, it's much like, sorry to bother you, I can say I've never seen another movie like this. 2012's Branded, which, if you don't know the basic story, if I can say, is this is in a world where an advertising company is so evil and corrupt that they've managed to make advertisements come to life, and our hero has to stop these advertisements from coming to life by sacrificing a cow, and Max von Sydow is the lead villain of the movie, who's just in a hoodie for most of it, and then he disappears like Obi-Wan at the end of it, and his fucking hoodie disappears. It sounds like I'm making up this movie. It's real. It's insane. It's also kind of boring at the same time. It's really bizarre, really weird. Then, from 2013, I have a movie that I desperately wanted to have as one of my 2 bad picks for this, but it's a weird thing where it's so unavailable now. It used to be on Amazon Prime, but now it's just completely lost to the internet, which is such a bummer, because it's probably my pick for the most hilariously bad movie of the decade. It is Neil Breen's Fateful Findings. I can't really describe this movie. It is one of the most insane ego trips I've ever seen. It is the movie that introduced me to the weird ego of Neil Breen, who is a freaking architect in Arizona, who gets money to make these insane ego trip movies about how the government's corrupt and he's the only one that can save us. And this is his crown jewel masterpiece. So he's done plenty of other, like, terribly bad, funny movies since, but this is the one that just, like, crystallizes sort of, like, all of the weird gloriousness of this terrible, terrible filmmaker. It's like, imagine Tommy Wiseau, but with less personality and more of an ego. And you got Neil Breen with his magnum opus Fateful Findings. Winter's Tale we just talked about. Really bad, really terrible. From 2014. Not going to say much else. From 2016, a movie that Kaycee previously mentioned that stars one of the stars of A Winter's Tale, Collateral Beauty. It is a weird, huge cast ensemble movie about somebody, having a rough go at life, and he's the big head of a corporation with Will Smith, and his buddies, Edward Norton, Kate Winslet, Michael Pena, are like, man, we need to cheer him up. Let's frame him for basically being insane so he can get fired and we can end up getting his shares of the fucking corporation, and he'll be happier that he's not working. And that's just the start of where this fucking weird-ass movie goes, where it's so much once the played straight. It's like, oh no, this is a warm, accepting, fun movie about friendship and loss and getting over grief. And it's one of the most baffling big-budget studio movies I've ever seen. Another one that's so incompetent from 2017 is The Snowman, which Kaycee also referenced earlier in this episode, where Michael Fassbender plays a detective named Harry Hole, who tries to investigate a snowman murderer, and infamously was a movie that started production with not even a finished script whatsoever. And it shows also that they didn't have enough time to complete shooting all of the scenes that were in that incomplete script, apparently. And it takes Thomas Alfredson, who delivered 2 of the better movies of the last several years with Let the Right One In and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and then plops whatever the fuck this is out in a movie that might just completely end his career, which is a bummer, because he is actually a pretty talented filmmaker. But then again, you made The Snowman, so maybe it wasn't meant to be. Another one from 2017, I have Colin Trevorrow's The Book of Henry, which is another movie that sort of plays in the collateral beauty spectrum of, oh hey, this is a sweet, fun family movie about like a really precocious genius kid that keeps turning its fucking heels into weird genre places that feel so insulting and disturbing and weird and gross and horrific, but the movie plays it so sunny, even when things get like really dire. It's just like, this is a fun family romp of a movie. It's an Amblin movie. Because that's what Colin Trevorrow wants to do. He just wants to keep making, like, Amblin productions. But he can't really make that work at all because it's just, like, a massive, ungodly garbage fire. Now, from 2018, speaking of garbage fires, I have Life Itself, which is the film from This Is Us creator Dan Fogelman, who was like, oh, hey, I want to make my movie that's sort of like a magnum opus of what I feel like life really means and what relationships are all about and what sort of legacy can kind of mean with another all-star cast. And it's one of the most self-indulgent pieces of shit I've ever seen. It makes so many bizarre turns that feel like somebody who's like, oh man, we're going to make you cry with this unexpected twist. And it's like, no dude, you're just making me really scratch my head about why you would do this. Why, like, Oscar Isaac, Olivia Wilde, Antonio Banderas, Olivia Cook, so many like talented people would bother showing up in this movie. It's just one of the most baffling misfires I've ever seen. That's another sort of train wrecky one, like, I can't believe I'm watching this. And that's incredibly interesting, if nothing else. But for my absolute worst of the decade, I was thinking about this a lot, and I was like, what movie exemplifies everything I hated about filmmaking in the 2010s? The worst, bottom-of-the-barrel stuff that, like, wastes a lot of talent, tries to rip off a lot of much better movies, tries to maybe start something bigger that it can't really achieve, and just shows somebody in the director's chair who doesn't deserve it whatsoever. Thought long and hard about it, and it just had to be...
No!
The Mummy from 2017. I think this is a gross waste of money on every level. I think it's just a garbage example of Universal, like, hey, let's try and do the Dark Universe thing, and none of the characters work. Everyone's just like a really scummy piece of shit. It's the worst Tom Cruise performance I think I've seen in a bit. It shows that he maybe should just stick to Mission Impossible movies. Sorry, Top Gun, but I think it's maybe a lost cause. It's another bad Russell Crowe performance. It's all about universe building without building any kind of story or engaging characters or anything. All the action sequences look like shit. And it's Alex Kurtzman, who has been just like failing upwards once again, just like keeps making all of these big fucking leaps to like, oh, you're gonna run the fucking Dark Universe and direct this movie as your first fucking movie. And it was a massive misfire that completely dunked a Dark Universe in all sorts of ways, so it ends up becoming this weird, sort of grafted initial, like, head of a worm that couldn't extend out to the rest of a worm. It's just like a decapitated worm head of a movie.
I'm surprised that was your first one. I really, really am. It's not what I would have expected.
We will discuss that, I guess, in a bit. But Adam, you have a much more loving list to talk about. Why don't you talk about your best list?
Okay, now this was insanely difficult, Thomas. Like, you had a bad time with it. I also had. You're gonna have a bad time. So, just to start naming off randomly, like we talked about. The first one I'll name off, I got Drive. My God, what is it? By Nicholas Winding Refn, or however the fuck you say his name. I love this movie. I love the soundtrack to this movie. Also kind of proved to me that Gosling can kind of be the shit, and that, he's like kind of like a William Hurt, Kevin Costner type actor. Also, Albert Brooks is a bad guy. Fucking fantastic. Then I have Snowpiercer. I love dirty, dark sci-fi. I love great acting, confined spaces movies, adventure movies, fixed point sort of ideas. And I absolutely love Snowpiercer. It's dark, it's fucked up, but it's thrilling. Next, I have another Ryan Gosling movie. I have Blade Runner 2049. My opinion, the perfect way to do that horrible term that they use, but you got to use it, the legacy sequel, where you take a movie that existed 20, 30, 40 years ago and do a sequel. Blade Runner 2049, to me, is the formula. Next, I have a movie we've covered on the show. I have Moonlight. We've already talked about it quite a bit, but Moonlight is one of the movies that, when I saw it, it had been a long time since I got really emotional in a movie, and Moonlight did that, and I will never forget it, and I will always love it for that. Then I have, I want to say it was last year, it might have been the year before, I have Annihilation with Natalie Portman. Kind of for the same reason I said with Snowpiercer. It's sci-fi, it's dark, it's disturbing, just really, really well acted, and also another great performance from Tessa Thompson as well. Then I have Hell or High Water with Chris Evans, Ben Foster, and Jeff Bridges. He's absolutely fantastic in it, as well as an always good Ben Foster, and a really, really sort of shooting higher than I knew he could, Chris Pine. I just really, really love that movie, and also a fantastic soundtrack. Next, I have Sicario by Denis Villeneuve, who also did Blade Runner 2049. This guy is proving to be my favorite director of the last 10 years, and I'm super excited for Dune and where he's going to go next. Sicario is just a really sort of violent, disturbing take on the war on drugs and how far, our government potentially, probably, unfortunately, does go to sort of establish dominance in countries that we maybe don't even belong in. Then I have your number one pick from last week. I have Fury Road. Everything you said about it, I completely agree with. I can't agree more. I think Fury Road is also a really, really good way to do a Lego sequel. Next, I have The Witch, which is my favorite horror film easily of the last 10 years. I think it's beautifully shot, acted. I have zero complaints about The Witch. And my number one is my favorite comic book movie of the last 10 years.
All right, let's do this one last time.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I cannot gloat about this movie. To me, it's the best Spider-Man movie ever. It's one of the best animated movies I've ever seen. fantastic soundtrack, wonderful voice acting, a lot of heart, a lot of connections, a lot of jokes, a lot of everything. If you can find a fault with Into the Spider-Verse, then I can't fuck with you no more. I think it's a perfect movie.
All right, yeah, we did have a bit of recurring stuff. Really glad to hear that. But now, Kaycee, you have an interesting sort of angle you were going to go with your best list, right?
Yeah, I did not want to repeat things that either of you would have said, so I essentially had a list drawn up with a few extras. This isn't my definitive, here's the best of the 2010s, because there are some things that I knew had already been brought up, either in these episodes or in previous episodes that I didn't want to dwell on. But I'll just start as at number 10, Jordan Peele's Us. I really love really weird horror movies. I really love that 2019 was the year that people who got their start in horror did their second movie and just threw everything in. Again, the idea of like a kitchen sink of a movie. This is like that. It's weird. It's metaphorical. I don't even know if I get it. I don't know if there's anything to get, but I love it. Number 9 is Carol. I like that it's a very old way to tell a new story. It feels like an old Hollywood movie. It borrows blocking from classic films. Number 8 is Inside Out, just because I like the idea of showing something very emotionally mature with a target audience of 5 years old and letting it take it seriously. Number 7 is Lady Bird. I'm saying this because I want to talk about how much I loved the editing of Greta Gerwig movies. This, and I also got it with Little Women. And if she had a huge movie that she had to edit down into a small movie, it doesn't feel like something was intentionally omitted or left out, but you also get a sense that these people are going on in a world much bigger than them. Like, I love when she shows up to her best friend's house on prom night, her best friend is crying, and you just get a sense of she was on her own little adventure this entire movie that you did not even get to see. There's a lot of stuff like that that I adore every time I watch even just tiny moments. Number 6 is Hereditary. I love throwbacky horror movies. This is very throwback. I like horror movies as metaphor. This is an entire metaphor for the trauma and the terrible things you might be passing down from parent to child, which was a big factor in my own personal life going into this decade. So this movie really stuck with me. Number 5, Blind Spotting. Again, you guys have done an episode on it, but echoing what you guys said, it's really great. It's a great companion piece to Sorry to Bother You. They make for a great double feature. Daveed Diggs gave the best performance of last year, and the fact that he was not nominated bugs me every single second of every single day. It's an amazing first film. This is a great decade for debut filmmakers. And number 4 is The Babadook. Again, horror as metaphor. Again, super cheaply made. I was in one of the first screenings they ever showed in the US. I knew nothing about the movie. It got done. I stood up and said, that is what I've wanted a remake of The Haunting to be. Not knowing I would get a remake of The Haunting this year that I would love. Number 3 is The World's End. It is my favorite of Edgar Wright's movies. It is far and away my favorite of the Cornetto trilogy. I think that if those movies are the wild and crazy Friday night, this is the Monday morning. This is the Hangover. This is Simon Pegg looking at the Nick Frost characters and trying to do a very tragic version of that while Nick Frost gets to play the Simon Pegg character. It is brutal. It is painful. It is hilarious. It is well shot. It is a blast. Number 2 is The Last Jedi. This is my favorite Star Wars movie. If this movie asked me to start a holy war, I might do it. This is what I wanted the franchise to be for decades. And number 1 is
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 second, please.
Please, Mr. Kennedy. I don't want to go. Don't shoot me in the outer space. Please, Mr. Kennedy. I don't want to go. Don't shoot me in the outer space.
Inside Llewyn Davis. I don't have any grander scheme of this. I just kind of love this movie.
Yeah, that was one we previously talked about too, and we agree that it's a pretty great one.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, and I mean some of those I'm glad you mentioned Last Jedi. That was one that has grown and more in my estimation, honestly, since it came out originally. I know we're losing a lot of listeners right now. I guess maybe, hopefully not.
No, let them
oh,
tweet
boo
at me.
fucking who?
Let them tweet at me. I will fight people on The Last Jedi every second of every day. This is the hill I will die on.
We haven't talked much about Rise of Skywalker, because we were talking about good movies mostly here. But especially after seeing that one, made me appreciate even some of the smaller missteps I had with Last Jedi even more, honestly, after that. we won't dwell on that necessarily. The internet's already doing that currently. To, I guess, go back a bit, Adam was bringing this up in terms of my worst list, just to get some of that out of the way. Yeah, why were you surprised necessarily that I hated The Mummy that much?
I just thought because The Mummy's such a tepid fucking, to me, I expected it to be terrible. So I was just really surprised that you had that much hate for it. And to even go back further to last episode when we did our honorable mentions, like for the best and the worst, one that I cannot believe I didn't fucking bring up that should have been on my fucking list was Yoga Hosers.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's
sad that it wasn't.
I think it's just because we previously talked about it in the Kevin Smith episode. I mostly tried to avoid ones that we talked about previously, aside from obviously Dracula. But yeah, I mean that one is very much to me. But you know what, I'll say this, as much as like I hated Yoga Hosers, at the very least that's like such a small potatoes movie that it really like isn't some giant slap in the face to me. I feel like with all of the resources that like a Mummy had, you know, tackling, admittedly not my favorite of the Universal monsters, but at least one you could maybe do the most valuable stuff with because it's not that like engaging a character necessarily of the Mummy, and turning out just like the biggest giant studio turd possible. Like, it's all of the worst things about all of the major blockbusters of this decade in one package. It's like, I could have talked about any number, like, Fan Four Stick, or some of the other ones you might have mentioned from last week, or just like a bunch of the big or more forgettable movies. This is the one that has the biggest stink to me because it has all of those elements so down the line, right down to specifically, like, my least favorite thing about the movie is how they Universal shamelessly lifts from a property they own with American Werewolf in London with the Jake Johnson character in the most like massive fuck you way possible, in such a shitty, uncreative way. It's such a fucking disaster.
We did this last episode. Give me 3 more bad ones that didn't make your list. Without not talk about them, just boom, boom, boom.
You know, I'll go with ones you maybe didn't mention. Knock Knock, which has the funniest Keanu Reeves performance. Hilarious, terrible movie. There's this horror anthology movie called Kuso, which is one of the most, like, unfathomably unentertaining things I've ever seen, for sure. Yeah, and you know what? Bad. This is one I've heard a lot of praise for. I just want to go out with, like, I'm, like, not a fan of this movie whatsoever. A lot of people liked Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. I think that is one of the most twee, stupid, like, attempts at trying to do, like, a coming-of-age story I've seen in a decade full of great coming-of-age stories. That was one where I heard so many people loved it, and it's like, this is a fucking aggressively annoying movie. Terrible.
Yeah, I didn't catch that one. I have 0 interest. All right, quick 3 for me. What We Do in the Shadows. You know, I mean, obviously, it's What We Do in the Shadows. I love it. John Wick, Chapter 1. And 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oh, I forgot about 10 Cloverfield Lane. I love that movie.
Fucking John Goodman alone. It's worth it for that.
Yeah, definitely one of those where, like, I wish it wasn't attached to that franchise.
I know. Well,
it works so well on its own.
Yeah. I completely agree. And you know what? The thing is, real quick, if it wasn't attached to that franchise, I don't think how they end it would have been as bothersome. Because the spaceships come in, you're like, well, wait a minute, this isn't the fucking monster. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but it's that weird thing where, like, that when they originally introduced the idea that was going to be, like, an anthology franchise, I was more on board with it, with specifically even that movie, where it's like, oh, no, it doesn't really connect to Cloverfield, and I'm happy it doesn't. And then Cloverfield Paradox just, like, shits the bed on that.
Cloverfield Paradox, like, fuck all that, it's directly tied in.
It's so dumb, the way that it's done.
It's so bad.
Oh, did they God damn it, because I skipped Cloverfield Paradox, and I don't think I missed...
Just to spoil it for you, literally most of the movie has nothing to do with it until, like, all of a sudden at the very end, like, there's been this giant monster attack on Earth that they kind of keep hinting at, and then what pops out of the clouds but the Cloverfield monster, that's the end of the movie.
But a giant version of it.
Right, that literally pops out of the clouds, so it's even so much larger.
Yeah.
Oh...
But Kaycee, what are a few maybe honorable mentions you didn't mention on your list?
Off the top of my head, Booksmart, Beale Street Could Talk, Big Sick, Social Network, those 4 rock.
Yeah, okay. Yep, those are all really good ones. Especially Big Sick. Big Sick was one of my favorite romantic comedies of this decade, just in terms of going from a personal story. It just really worked, and it's got a great dual thing from Ray Romano and particularly Holly Hunter as M. Levy Gordon's parents. Phenomenal. I loved both of their turns in that movie. And yeah, I mean, I guess I will only comment in terms of some of the stuff on your list, Adam, that Blade Runner 2049, I agree, is probably the best example of a sequel thing, to the point where I like it more than the original movie. I dig Blade Runner, but I think like that one just has more of an emotional resonance with the same sort of like big architecture and stuff like that and production design. And I'll just say that, like, again, I guess spoilers if you didn't see it, the whole sequence, like, after everything's done, the whole, like, arc for Ryan Gosling's character is one of my favorites in, like, a big studio movie, where instead of him being the chosen one, he's just a guy who plays a very important role in getting the actual chosen one to their place. I love that. And him laying on the fucking snow is so beautiful. I love that whole bit of that movie. I think we can move on to our feedback section here. Where we asked you all, usually on every Monday, about our, whatever we're covering. We ask you for your good and bad picks. And this time, because, as I said, last week we were doing a two-parter. Last week we asked you all for the worst of the 2010s, and now we asked you for the best of the 2010s. First off, I've got Rachel Hillis, who says, Get Out, The Hateful Eight, Force Awakens, Rogue One, Crazy Rich Asians, The Shape of Water, Call Me By Your Name, Grand Budapest Hotel, Inside Out, Life of Pi, Les Miserables, the live-action Beauty and the Beast, Pacific Rim, Crimson Peak, Paddington, Fury Road, Cabin in the Woods, and Spider-Verse. Jason Broomfield says, I had fun thinking about this. I think for me it's gotta be Mad Max Fury Road, Moonlight, and The King's Speech. Amanda Leonard said, Guardians of the Galaxy, because it was fun, good casting, good tunes. I've seen it maybe 10 times, never bothers me. Mad Max Fury Road, all around it did justice to the original series. Andre Rogau says John Wick, The Raid, Ex Machina, The Guest, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Deadpool, Hunt for the Wilder People, and What We Do in the Shadows. Jacob Schott said Rogue One, Hereditary, The Witch, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Interstellar, Get Out, Babadook, and Birdman, to name a few. Way more horror movies than I thought I would ever enjoy in the past decade. Joel Copeland, at Real Joel Copeland, actually gave us his list, which he's got number 10, Drive, number 9, Her, number 8, The Social Network, number 7, Lady Bird, number 6, Under the Skin, number 5, The Tree of Life, number 4, Moonlight, number 3, Margaret, number 2, Shoplifters, and number 1, A Separation. And then James Rodriguez has this to say, he says, Moonlight, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, The Farewell, Hereditary, Boy, Blade Runner 2049, Paddington 2, Mad Max Fury Road, Drive, Cabin in the Woods, Short Term 12, Your Name, and 13th. Yeah, I mean, a lot of great movies mentioned on there.
Both of our lists have a lot in common with a lot of those.
Yeah, and even Casey's list, too. A lot of ones from him. Mm-hmm. I mean, particularly, ones that you mentioned, Kaycee, that are also mentioned here. I definitely agree about, I think Hereditary is at least one of the more engrossing of, many great horror movies that happened this decade. I was, so engrossed particularly. It's got, if nothing else, I heard some people have issues with that movie. No one can disagree that Toni Collette's performance is, one of the premier performances of the decade, if nothing else. She's so on point in that fucking movie. And then Inside Out, I would say, is my favorite Pixar movie of that decade, and maybe ever. I think, the more I think about it. It's just, so perfectly put together that it's only maybe paralleled by, Toy Story 2 and a couple of the other really top-tier ones. It's definitely in, the very top tier of, those. And especially in the decade where Pixar, kind of faltered. This was the decade where, it started out with Cars 2, and we got a lot of bad sequels and prequels and stuff. That was the one that really shined. But, I mean, any of those that sparked your fancy, Adam, that maybe we haven't mentioned on our lists?
I'm definitely one of the ones with Hereditary where I'm I really like it, but I do have some issues with it. But I do agree that Toni Collette is obviously fucking fantastic. I do think it was a good call on Guardians of the Galaxy. I think that might still be one of the better Marvel firsts, if you get what I mean, the first in a series. I think Guardians of the Galaxy still might be the best one. If not, it's damn near the top. Rogue One, I also really like. Rogue One is good because it gave you what, as a kid, you wanted to see Darth Vader do, even though it was the last 5 minutes of the movie. That was awesome. And then Andre threw in The Raid and Ex Machina, which also almost made my list. Both of those movies, I think those are absolutely fantastic films. And I like Get Out, Hateful Eight. No, I'm good. But again, a lot of ones that almost went in my list, man. A lot of them. So pretty much all pretty good calls. It's only very, very few that I disagree with.
Yeah, I would definitely say The Raid, and even with a lot of bloat problems with its sequel, Raid 2. Those are some of the best action sequences of the year. Even with like a John Wick, there was like a bit of a drought of action for especially the first half of this decade. And then, but like with the exceptions of like these 2 movies and the first John Wick, I completely agree.
Dude. You got to throw Dredd in there too. I didn't even think of Dredd,
which is very similar to The Raid, which is very interesting. Just in terms of like a structural level, they're both very similar movies.
Dredd's an honorable mention for me too. That's a good one.
Oh yeah, that's one of the ones that also was like in like that big ass top 50 list of sorts that I had.
Fuck you, Thomas. This was a pain in the ass, man.
No, we had a mutual suffering to that extent. But I also, Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the most I've rewatched of any MCU movie. It's one that just really stuck out. And I would we've had this argument before, Adam, but I would say Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is one of the rare ones of those MCU movies that has gotten better every time I've seen it. I think it just is like a great way of developing a lot of those characters for me, and also just like really pushing things in terms of like an emotional standpoint for the MCU in my eyes.
Okay. We're never going to see eye to eye on that one, man. This is
probably not. No. But Kaycee, any of these spark your fancy too that were listed?
Blade Runner 2049 is like, I never heard the phrase Lego sequel, but that is probably the best of them, and it's my favorite of those 2 movies. Cabin Woods I nearly put on mine, except that I believe it was on one of yours last week.
No.
God, what the fuck podcast was I listening to then?
the one that fucking Bill Nye was on, I guess.
Oh, it was Double Edge, Double Gill. Oh, it's the one with the fish.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. We keep getting those guys as mail.
Spider-Verse, again, was definitely a contender until it was on both of y'all's. Yeah. Guardians 1 is good. I just prefer Guardians 2 so significantly that I don't think I'll watch Guardians 1 again if that's an option.
Damn. Now there's a hot take.
No, maybe it's who I am, but stories about gaining and losing daddies kind of are hitting me right now. I'm sorry. What can you do, homie?
Yes, homies. For life. But all right, we want to thank everybody for all that feedback there. We also had a bit of feedback related to our previous episode about the best and worst of the decade, particularly about The Fanatic, where first off we had James Rodriguez again say, I decided to watch The Fanatic before listening to the latest episode of Double Edge Double Bill, and I regret my decision. Travolta is cartoonish in this, which wants to be about the relationship between obsessive fandom and celebrities. It's just about killing time until the grisly stuff comes around. Yeah, I mean, James, if you'd listened, we would have warned you specifically not to bother watching it, but you decided to be brave and try and watch it there. And then Brian Kane even said, I'll listen, but first I gotta go take a poo. Which, of course, is referencing the classic line that John Travolta says in the film. I forgot, like, when we were doing that last week, we didn't mention my favorite line of the movie, where there's a point where John Travolta's about to choke somebody out, and he says, I wish Freddy Krueger would cut off your head, and then roll into the street and get hit by a car! Which is the line where I died. I died laughing. That stupid fucking awful line.
So fucking good.
So fucking bad. Kaycee, have you seen The Fanatic? Especially after our lovely discussion.
Listening to your discussion was kind of a sine wave of, oh, I need to see this too. No, I don't need to see this.
Good, we did our job. You should have been like Kaycee, James. Actually, listen. We would have told you no. But we want to thank some people before we head out of here. We want to thank Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used on our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarter for the art that's used for our show as well. And thanks, of course, to Mr. Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, it's lovely to have you back on. And got anything to plug?
Just my Twitter handle @thekayser. That's about it until I finally get finish up on my re-edit of Titanic that doesn't have Leonardo DiCaprio. So took 12 years.
Oh, it took 12 years to make? That's interesting.
It took 12 years to take Leo out of that movie.
So do you replace him with anybody, or is it just nothing?
No. This is sorry, it's a joke, but it's real. It's just a thing I'm working on in my spare time, on and off, where I want to do a recut of Titanic being only historical, and you can't take Rose out because important stuff gets told to her, or she says important things for, like, that's how you learn there's not enough lifeboats and why that is. But you can cut Leo out almost entirely, and I want to see if I can do that.
That'll be interesting. Definitely check Reddit /alternative cuts for that one. And we also, of course, want to encourage you to follow us on @DEDBpod on Facebook and Twitter. That's where we have our little questionnaires about, our best and worst, whatever, asking you guys out there so we can be read on the show. And you can also submit feedback to doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com for that as well. And of course, you can also follow me individually at Not the Who's Tommy, where I post all my various musings and such about different things. And I also do some writing, one at marianithomas.wordpress.com, the award-winning blog Adam was talking about earlier, that he's such a fan of. And if you get on there right about now, I believe there should be a little bit about my personal best of 2019, which I didn't do a whole decade list on there written because obviously I wanted to save it for this. And then, of course, I want to definitely shout out TrueSuperheroFans.com, where I also do some writing and such. That's definitely, it's back up, and we've been posting stuff regularly now. And, Adam, you still do some stuff at Ghoulish Courts?
I do. Like I said last week, I've been kind of out of it for a couple of weeks. With the holidays, the move, the whole house was sick. So it's been a little rough going the last couple weeks, but yep, I'm still there. I'm still doing custom artwork. You mentioned you heard the plug on the show. I cut you a discount, pretty big discount, and whatever you need, I can basically do.
Yeah, and for more great content of the two of us just joking around, you can definitely subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcast platforms. If you're listening to this on the ESO network, why not dig into the archives for the first several episodes that we didn't post up here? And also make sure to rate, review, or at least just share us around to give the show more visibility. That's what you need. It's like the underrated gems of the 2010s. You need to just get us out there in the ether.
Yeah, I don't know what the big fucking deal is at this point. Like, let's just go. Get the let out.
Get the let out, yes. Like we'll be doing right now as we finally finish this episode with our picking for next week. So now we're going back to doing some normal stuff a bit more, which is maybe something to say, given our next director maybe a bit out of the norm to some respect, but also kind of creating a lot of norms for genre filmmaking with, he's having a birthday, his 72nd birthday, so we decided to do an episode about John Carpenter films. Sue's a director we both love, despite the fact that our only John Carpenter movie on this series that we've done is Escape from L.A.
Yeah, I know, which was originally one of my choices. Like, oh no, fuck, we already did that.
Yes, of course. Though, interestingly, even though we haven't discussed anything on this particular podcast, we actually first podcasted Adam with a John Carpenter film on a different show back in the day.
That's true. They Live.
Yes.
Great movie.
Which, even though I have the good picks, and as you mentioned, you have the bad picks, I did not choose They Live for that very reason. But there's definitely a lot of other good John Carpenter movies, and a fair amount of bad ones to discuss. So you have your two picks, and you've chosen numbers between 1 and 10 for those, and I've done the same for my two picks. And when we have a guest like Kaycee, they pick number between 1 and 10 for both our choices. Gets us our good and bad feature for the following episode. So Kaycee, for my two good picks, number between 1 and 10.
All right, so my favorite John Carpenter movie came out in 1982, so for good, I'll say the number 8.
This is interesting. I have what a lot of people say is an underrated one of his, but one that, when I watched this the first and only time I've seen it so far, wasn't the hugest fan. Hope to revisit it here and maybe gain a bit more appreciation for it. I have 1987's Prince of Darkness.
Oh, fuck. I'm kind of in your boat here, Thomas. I think I've seen it twice, and it was both of them a long time ago.
Oh, all right.
So we'll see. It'll be a revisit.
So yeah, that'll be interesting for sure. And that was, of course, at number 8 for Kaycee. But then at number 2, funnily enough, I had another one that I think gets lost in the shuffle. Was his first sort of big film that got him some attention. 1976's Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah, that's a good one. Also, I haven't seen that in a while, too, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would hold up. So actually, 2 choices I was not expecting.
No, yeah. I decided to go a bit more against the grain, like John Carpenter did in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess. That's my excuse. Anyway,
yeah.
So now for your 2 bad picks, Adam, Kaycee's got to pick a number between 1 and 10.
All right. So I picked 8 for the first part, 2 for the second part. Number 2.
Number 2, on the dot, we have John Carpenter's magnum opus, Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
Oh, fuck. No, I thought this would happen.
It had to, right?
Oh no! Yeah. A Chevy Chase vehicle.
Yeah, buddy.
Oh, we already did nothing but trouble. No.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Chevy Chase will pop up again at some point. At number 9, I had Ghosts of Mars.
Okay.
Which I'm glad wasn't chosen because I don't want to talk about that fucking movie.
That's one I've avoided. I've never seen that particular one for a lot of reasons.
Don't watch it.
No, yeah.
Yeah, don't. And now you don't have to. No. So good for you.
Yeah.
It sounds like your double bill next week will not be double-edged.
I don't know. Like I said, Prince of Darkness is one that a lot of people say is underrated, and it's been a while since I've seen it. So I'm very curious to give that a shot again. But that is the end of our discussion here. And on that note, this has been running long, guys. Let's just end this. For the love of God, end this.
Bye.
Oh, bye.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping through Amazon.com or the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.